Hello and welcome to NT 101. My name is Victor and I'm excited to start this video series on neurotypical language, fundamentals of communication and behavior. A lot of us find it confusing to navigate neurotypical social environments. It's almost like some people are using the same words while speaking a different language, and learning a different language is very hard if you don't have intentionally crafted resources, like a beginner's book to get you started. A lot of concepts evade people for years or even decades when they could actually be explained within minutes. And yet, a lot of answers I've encountered online or from asking people directly have been unreliable. So here's my attempt to construct something a bit more robust and principled, a foundation that you can continue to build on at your own pace. Here are some of the things that you'll hopefully get from this series: an understanding of core themes about contrasts and overlaps between different communication and behavioral styles, an inclusive framework for understanding all of the above, a holistic understanding of numerous everyday examples, understanding the values between different communication styles, and finally, a more informed and empowered choice as to how you want to participate and interact or not with these patterns. What you won't get from this series. First off, this is not a skills-based training. The perspective here is morally neutral. Behaviors aren't labeled as good or bad. Even harmful communication is examined through values and context without judgment. No alarmism or pressure to act. The series doesn't tell you what to do with this information it presents. That's your choice. And finally, this is not about an us versus them narrative. I believe that all neurotypes deserve destigmatization and representation. There will be a lot of examples illustrating value conflict and miscommunication, because that's where a lot of interesting stuff happens. But these potentially jarring contrasts are not about dividing people. I believe that conflict can be a healthy part of different voices getting to know each other, and that knowledge can empower us to handle our differences more compassionately. Some personal context. So, I'm a self-care coach for gifted and neurodivergent adults, being autistic and gifted myself. But I'm not an expert on social behavior or communication or language. The series reflects my personal interpretations and ways of making sense of things, and other ways are valid too. I'm human and I won't always get things right, and I'm open to further learning and feedback. Even so, my goal here is to provide a clear starting point for others. I invite you to join me in exploring and refining these ideas together. If you're curious about what has led me to this point that I'm at, well, I've never really been a natural at communicating. I developed my social skills quite late in multiple regards. I've dabbled in various topics and areas shown here, and then in the last year especially, I started to see these patterns fitting together very clearly again and again, and kind of like piecing together a theory of everything when it comes to neurotypicalism. I'm excited to share that with you, and I think it will offer something quite different to even existing books on the subject, none of which I've actually read. Of course, this is all a tentative work in progress, but here's what I've got so far, kind of as a teaser of concepts we might explore. And let's see how far we get. My aim is to always draw attention to underlying themes in addition to just the examples. And hopefully you'll see what I mean by the same themes coming up again and again, even in wildly unrelated examples. Eventually, when you see the structure behind all the confusion, my videos might start seeming so repetitive that it puts you to sleep, and we'll both be happy because you can move on with your life. We need to cover some really important background context before we even begin. If you're newer to the neurodiversity movement, or you think that neurodivergent means having a diagnosed neurotype, then this part is especially important. Let's hear from some key neurodiversity advocates. The word neurodivergent is a socio-political term coined by Kassiane Asasumasu. It is clarified by lived experience educators infographic here. It is not a medical or clinical term. It is not about diagnosis or disorders or biological differences in the brain. So what is it about? One definition of neurodivergent given by Kassiane is those whose neurocognitive functioning diverges from dominant social norms. Trauma Geek illustrates this through the visual of a small box representing standardized white culture expectations of neurocognitive functioning. It's a small box surrounded by significant human diversity in terms of functioning, and the word neurodivergent helps us talk about the way society treats people who don't fit in that small box. The activist context here has a lot to do with pushing back on Western, capitalist, white privilege, and ableism. And so the term was created to be inclusive of everyone who experiences marginalization for not fitting those privileged social norms. Kassiane has explicitly emphasized that neurodivergent is a term of inclusion, not exclusion, and that mental illnesses are included as neurodivergences. And this is likely because every now and then, people with diagnosed neurotypes, such as autism or ADHD, mistakenly assume that neurodivergent is a clinical term that exists based on a medical model of disability. Trauma Geek highlights an interesting point that neurotypicality is not necessarily a majority, and describes how neurotypical is the dominant neurotype, not because of numbers, but because of power and privilege in society. As a quick aside, if I were to recommend one influencer or advocate to follow, it would definitely be Trauma Geek, a storyteller researcher who confronts difficult neurodiversity topics with a level of nuance that I just don't see being addressed by anyone else. You can follow their Facebook page where they post essays and insights from time to time, or you can find some of those essays on their website. Some of the implications of a truly inclusive lens may be confusing at first. A hypothetical neurotypical person could also be neurodivergent. They could become more neurodivergent. They might be neurodivergent in one culture but not another, or in some contexts but not others. In other words, these labels are not black and white, especially if we zoom into one specific behavior or context at a time. I'll point out a difference in the way I'll be using the word neurotypical for this series. Instead of it always being privileged white culture, I'll speak as though different regions or groups can have their own flavor of what's considered neurotypical, though much of my cultural awareness and examples will be based on Western English-speaking cultures. But let's keep in mind how fuzzy these labels can be, depending on whether we're trying to reason about neurotypes, behaviors, social norms, or communication norms. Even the label autism, for example, is not black and white. It means many different things, and there is no universal consensus on what autism even is. There's kind of a contrast here where the more inclusive we are, the less that labels have any absolute meaning. And I'll counteract this potential loss of clarity by using stereotypical examples that seem particularly black and white. The examples might tend to make neurotypical behaviors look bad in certain ways, but keep in mind, the point is to understand the patterns, not to go around reducing real people into ambiguous labels that will never have absolute meaning in the first place. I acknowledge that this approach will contain a lot of cultural bias, and this is just an imperfect starting point to build awareness. But I don't want to perpetuate the idea that Western standards are the reference point for any specific reasons of virtue or vice. Other perspectives matter, I just don't have the expertise to cover them all. Finally, I'll be using the term neuroliteral communication. I didn't come up with the word neuroliteral. It's a suggestion I saw online that I think is fairly suitable here. So if neurotypical communication is about dominant social norms, then neuroliteral communication is about social norms motivated by a high preference for direct or literal expression, often associated with, but not limited to, autism and ADHD. There are many forms of neurodivergent communication besides neuroliteralism that also deserve representation. I'll mostly focus on neuroliteralism because it's what I understand and it's a major starting point either way. In summary, this series will introduce core themes of neurotypical communication that appear over and over across many diverse situations. I'll highlight the values embedded with neurotypicalism and neuroliteralism, comparing their pros and cons in different scenarios. We examine all of this from an inclusive lens that doesn't judge values and differences as morally good or bad. Hopefully, you'll walk away with a greater appreciation for different styles and feeling more empowered when interacting across these differences. And that's it. Thanks for watching. Feel free to drop any questions or comments below. If you want to see more or you'd like to support my content creation journey, liking, sharing, or subscribing would be much appreciated and help me out a lot. Also, feel free to check out my other content via Linktree. It has my coaching website, my meme page, resources on neurodivergent burnout, info about my free grief group, and more. See you next time.